They dared to steal from the man who built the city, and now the city is about to bleed. Look at him, standing on that rooftop, rain hammering his scarred face, cigarette glowing like the last ember of mercy he still possesses. That's Don Vincenzo, the architect, Potenza. Mid-50s, built like the concrete foundations he poured with his own hands. Jagged scar down his cheek still glistening red, steel gray hair slicked back, black Italian suit soaked through, gold pinky ring catching the neon. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. Because tonight, his own flashy capo, Angelo, pretty boy Caruso, and that greasy rival, Giovanni, the collector Lombardi, emptied the family vault and walked away with the contracts that keep the entire skyline under Potenza's thumb. They thought the old lion was asleep. They were wrong.
This is the story of a man who built an empire and the savage revenge that will burn it back to his name. Stay with me. The rain is only just beginning to turn red. Before we continue this amazing story, please hit that subscribe button right now, like this video, and comment below. Now, let's see what happens next.
The rain fell hard on the city that night, just like it always did when trouble was coming. Don Vincenzo, the architect, Potenza, stood on the rooftop of his tallest building, looking out over the shining skyline he had built with his own hands. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders and strong in the chest, like someone who once carried bricks instead of giving orders. His steel gray hair was slick with rain, and a deep scar ran down his left cheek, still red and fresh from old fights. A half-burned cigarette hung from his lips, smoke curling up past the blood spots on his face. His black suit was soaked, but he stood tall, eyes cold and amber brown, staring at the towers below like they were his children. "This city was nothing but dirt and broken dreams when I started," he said in a low, rough voice. "I poured the concrete. I laid the steel. Every street, every light, every tall building carries my name in its bones. They call me the architect because I made this place rise from nothing." He remembered the early days when he was younger and hungry. Back then he worked with his hands, mixing cement under the hot sun while other men talked big and did little. He fought for every block, broke bones when he had to, and slowly turned empty lots into gold. Now the city paid him back every single day. From this rooftop he could see it all, the clubs, the restaurants, the offices, all of them under his control. Down on the streets, his men moved like shadows. They collected what was owed. Shop owners handed over envelopes without a word. Truck drivers nodded and kept driving. No one crossed Vincenzo Potenza. He was the king here, the man who owned the skyline. Marco the Hammer Rossi stood a few steps behind him, quiet and huge, his thick arms crossed and his shaved head shining in the rain. Vincenzo trusted him like a brother. But power brings danger. Vincenzo turned and walked down to his office, water dripping from his suit. There, waiting with his usual easy smile, was Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso. The younger man looked sharp in his charcoal suit, his black hair perfectly combed even in the storm. His dark eyes sparkled with ambition as he stepped forward. "Everything is running smooth tonight, boss," Angelo said. "The streets are quiet." Vincenzo studied him for a moment. He had raised this boy like family, taught him the rules, given him chances most men never got. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small set of keys. "Take these," Vincenzo said, placing them in Angelo's hand. "The vault needs watching tonight. I trust you with it, pretty boy. Keep it safe." Angelo closed his fingers around the keys and smiled wider. "You can count on me, Don Vincenzo, always." As Angelo walked away, something felt off in the air, like a small crack in a strong wall. Vincenzo lit another cigarette and stared after him. The city lights glowed below, but for the first time in years, a quiet worry touched his chest. He shook it off and looked back at the rain-soaked skyline he had built. Little did he know, the men he trusted most were already planning to take it all. Later that same rainy night, Vincenzo left the rooftop and stepped into the warm light of his private dining room.
The table was set with heavy plates of pasta and red wine. Marco the Hammer Rossi stood guard by the door like a living wall. He was a giant of a man, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and built with thick muscles that stretched his black shirt. His head was shaved clean, and behind his left ear sat a small tattoo of the Roman number 10. A faint knife scar ran across his throat from an old fight. His dark eyes were flat and steady, the kind that never looked away when things got bloody. Around his thick neck hung a heavy gold chain with a St. Michael medallion resting on his chest. Marco had been Vincenzo's shadow for years, breaking bones and keeping enemies in line without ever asking questions. "Sit down, Marco," Vincenzo said, waving a hand. "Eat with us tonight." Marco gave a short nod and took his place at the table, his huge hands making the fork look small. He stayed quiet, but his presence filled the room like a loaded gun. Then Luca Potenza walked in. At 24 years old, he was tall and lean like his father, with short dark hair that still looked a little messy from the rain. He wore a fitted black leather jacket over a simple white shirt and dark jeans. A thin gold chain with his mother's cross hung around his neck, the one thing he never took off. His amber brown eyes still carried a spark of hope that the streets had not yet crushed. He smiled at his father as he sat down. The 3 men ate while the rain beat against the windows. Vincenzo looked at his son and felt a deep pride swell in his chest. This was the boy who would carry the family name forward. "One day, all of this will be yours, Luca," Vincenzo said in his low, rough voice. "I built this city from nothing, so you would never have to start at the bottom like I did. Every tower out there has our blood in its foundation. You will stand on my shoulders and make it even stronger." Luca listened carefully, his eyes bright. "I know, Papa. I want to learn everything. I want to be ready when the time comes."
Vincenzo nodded, a rare soft smile touching his scarred face. The pride between father and son filled the room like warm light. Marco watched them both without speaking, his St. Michael medallion catching the light. He had protected this family for years, and he would keep doing it until his last breath. As they talked, Vincenzo's mind drifted for a moment to Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso. The young capo always showed up in expensive suits, with his hair perfectly combed and his gold watch shining. He smiled too much and moved too smoothly through the dangerous streets. Vincenzo pushed the thought away, but a small seed of doubt stayed in the back of his mind. Flashy men sometimes forgot where their loyalty belonged. For now, though, the dinner felt right. Father and son shared stories of the old days, and Marco sat like a silent rock, ready to crush any threat. Vincenzo looked at Luca and saw the future of his empire shining in those hopeful eyes. This was why he had fought so hard. This was why the city belonged to the Potenza name. Outside, the rain kept falling, hiding secrets that were already moving through the dark streets. But inside, for one quiet hour, the architect allowed himself to believe his kingdom was safe.
Hours after the family dinner, the rain grew heavier, pounding the streets like angry fists. Vincenzo had gone out to check on a few quiet matters across town. When he returned to the main building, something felt wrong. The usual guards were missing from their posts, and the hallway lights flickered in the storm. He pushed open the heavy door to the vault room, his black suit still damp from the night air. The strong smell of gunpowder and fresh blood hit him first. The steel vault door stood wide open, empty shelves staring back like broken teeth. Papers and important contracts that controlled half the city were gone. Stacks of money that should have been there had vanished too. In the middle of the mess lay 2 of his loyal men, shot and bleeding on the cold floor. One was still breathing weakly. Vincenzo dropped to one knee beside them, his amber brown eyes narrowing. A fresh splatter of blood landed on his left cheek, mixing with the rain that still clung to his scarred face. It was exactly the same look as the man on the rooftop, hard, dangerous, and now burning with sudden fire.
Then he saw him. Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso stood near the back wall, his charcoal suit still perfectly pressed, his jet black hair unmoved by the chaos. He held a small gun loosely in one hand, a charming half smile on his handsome face, but his dark eyes no longer looked loyal. They glittered with cold ambition. "Pretty boy," Vincenzo said, his voice low and rough like grinding concrete. "What have you done?" Angelo gave a small shrug, still smiling. "Times change, boss. You built this city, but you're getting old. I took what I needed, and I had help." At that moment, shadows moved behind Angelo. Men sent by Giovanni the collector Lombardi slipped out through a side door, carrying the last bags of stolen contracts and cash. Giovanni's people moved fast, their faces hidden under hoods, but their work was clear. They had emptied the heart of Vincenzo's empire in one rainy night. Vincenzo rose slowly to his full height, his broad shoulders tensed and his square jaw tightened under the salt and pepper stubble. The half-burned cigarette still hung from his lips, smoke curling past the fresh blood on his cheek. For the first time in many years, raw rage boiled up inside the architect. His hands curled into fists, so tight the gold pinky ring cut into his skin. "You smiled in my face," Vincenzo growled. "You took my keys and opened the door for snakes." Angelo backed toward the exit, his polished shoes stepping over the blood on the floor. "It's just business, Don Vincenzo. The city is big enough for new blood." The door slammed shut behind the betrayers. Vincenzo stood alone in the ruined vault, rain hammering the windows like drums of war. His cold amber eyes stared at the empty space where his power had been. Marco the Hammer Rossi burst in a moment later, his huge frame filling the doorway, fists already clenched. Luca followed close behind, his hopeful eyes now wide with shock.
Vincenzo wiped the blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. His voice came out quiet, but every word carried the weight of the city he had built. They stole from the wrong man. The heavy silence in the ruined vault pressed down like the rain outside. Vincenzo stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the empty shells and the blood on the floor. His mind worked fast, putting the pieces together like bricks in a wall. He walked over to the security screens on the wall. The cameras had caught everything. There was Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso, smiling as he opened the vault door with the keys Vincenzo had given him. Giovanni's men moved in quickly behind him, loading bags with cash and the important city contracts. Angelo had not fired a shot himself, but he had let the wolves in. His polished face and perfect hair looked calm the whole time, like he was simply doing everyday business.
Vincenzo felt a sharp pain in his chest, deeper than any old scar. He remembered the first time he had taken Angelo under his wing. The boy had been young and hungry back then, with quick hands and a sharp mind. Vincenzo had taught him how to move through the streets, how to read people, and how to build respect. He had given him chances, money, and a place at the table. "You can be more than street trash," he had told him once. "Stay loyal, and the city will reward you." Now those same lessons had been turned against him. The pride that had filled him during dinner with Luca now felt broken. How could he have missed the snake hiding behind that charming smile? The architect, who had built towers that touched the sky, had let a flashy underling fool him. It burned worse than any bullet. Vincenzo pulled out a cigarette, lit it with steady hands, and took a long drag. Smoke curled up past his scarred cheek as his amber-brown eyes turned cold and hard. The raw rage from moments ago settled into something deeper, a quiet, icy fury that would not fade. Marco the Hammer Rossi stepped closer, his huge body tense. The St. Michael medallion on his chest caught the dim light. "Boss," he said in his deep voice, "I swear on my life, I will hunt them down with you, every last one. My fists are yours until this is finished." Vincenzo nodded once. He knew Marco's word was iron. The big man had never broken a promise in all their years together. Then Luca moved forward, his leather jacket still wet from the rain. His mother's cross shone against his white shirt. The hopeful spark in his eyes had not disappeared. It had turned into something stronger. "Papa, I'm coming with you," he said firmly. "This is my family too. I won't hide while they try to take everything you built. Let me stand beside you." Vincenzo looked at his son for a long moment. He saw the young man ready to become the next brick in the empire. Pride mixed with worry in his chest, but he gave a slow nod. "Stay close, Luca. Watch and learn. This hunt will be ugly."
Outside, the rain kept falling on the city Vincenzo had raised from nothing. The betrayal still burned hot inside him, but now it had purpose. The architect was no longer just protecting his kingdom. He was preparing to take it back, one savage step at a time. The next night, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle, but the city still felt heavy with betrayal. Vincenzo gave the order with cold eyes, and Marco the Hammer Rossi moved out alone into the dark streets. He knew exactly where to start. The low-level thieves who did the dirty work for bigger men. Marco found the first one hiding in a back alley behind an old warehouse. The man was small and nervous, trying to slip away into the shadows. But the hammer was faster. His huge hand grabbed the thief by the collar and slammed him against the wet brick wall. The shaved head and thick neck made Marco look like a beast in the dim light. His prison tattoos stood out on his forearms as he rolled up his sleeves.
"Talk," Marco growled, his dark eyes flat and unblinking. "Who sent you to the vault?" The thief stammered, but Marco's fist came down hard. One punch, then another. Blood sprayed across the alley wall. The man gasped and finally broke. "It was Pretty Boy. He opened the door, but the orders came from higher up. Giovanni Lombardi. He's the one holding the contracts now." Marco hit him once more for good measure, then let the broken man slide to the ground. Blood mixed with the rainwater at his feet. The St. Michael medallion swung on his chest as he turned and walked away. He had what he needed. He tracked the second thief to a cheap bar on the edge of the city. This one tried to run, but Marco caught him in the parking lot. The interrogation was short and ugly. Fists pounded flesh until the man coughed up more details. Giovanni, the collector, had paid them well to move the stolen goods. The rival was already trying to sell the city contracts to the highest bidder.
By the time Marco returned, the first light of dawn was touching the skyline. He found Vincenzo waiting in a quiet office, cigarette smoke hanging in the air. The architect listened carefully as Marco laid out everything he had learned. "Giovanni Lombardi," Vincenzo repeated slowly. His voice stayed low and steady. "The soft little parasite who sits in his fancy club counting money that isn't his." He could picture the man clearly, short and stocky, with a round face and pale skin that never saw real street work. Receding hair slicked back with too much grease, heavy gold-rimmed glasses on a bulbous nose, and a small trimmed goatee around his oily smile. Always dressed in an expensive navy suit, his belly pushing against the buttons, fingers heavy with gold rings. Giovanni liked to sit in his neon-lit club, surrounded by stolen papers and stacks of cash, acting like a big player while others did the bleeding. Vincenzo took a long drag from his cigarette, eyes cold as steel. "We don't rush in blind. This will be surgical. No wild shooting that brings the whole city down on us. We cut the snake's head clean." He crushed the cigarette out and looked at Marco and Luca, who had been listening quietly. The plan was already forming in his mind. Careful steps, one after another, to take back what was his. The hammer had drawn first blood. Now the architect would make sure the rest of the revenge landed exactly where it hurt most. The city outside was waking up, but for Giovanni the collector and Angelo Pretty Boy, the real storm was only beginning. The drizzle had turned back into steady rain by the time Vincenzo and Luca stepped out into the night. They moved through the dark streets like shadows, following the trail Marco had uncovered. Word on the street was that Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso had been seen near the old docks, trying to hide while he made new plans. They found him in a narrow alley slick with rain. The walls glowed with weak neon light from a nearby sign. Angelo stood under a small overhang, his charcoal suit still looking sharp despite the weather. His jet-black pompadour was perfectly combed, not a hair out of place. The gold Rolex on his wrist caught the light as he checked the time, and a diamond stud sparkled in his left ear. His handsome face, with its high cheekbones and full lips, usually carried a charming smile, but tonight it changed the moment he saw Vincenzo and Luca step into the alley. Angelo's dark eyes widened. The confident look vanished, replaced by sudden fear that twisted his pretty features. He took a quick step back, his polished shoes splashing in a puddle. "Boss, Luca, wait," he said, his voice cracking. "It's not what you think." Vincenzo walked forward slowly, his broad shoulders filling the narrow space. Rain ran down his scarred cheek and soaked his black suit.
The half-burned cigarette between his lips glowed red as he stared at the man he had once trusted. Luca stayed close beside him, his leather jacket dripping, one hand near his side.
"You opened the door for them," Vincenzo said, in a low, steady voice. "You smiled while you stole from me, from the family." Angelo raised his hands, the Rolex glinting again. "Please, Don Vincenzo. I was scared. Giovanni made me do it. He said if I didn't help, he would come after all of us. I was trying to protect the empire, for you." His excuses poured out fast, his charming half-smile trying to return but failing. Fear made his long lashes flutter and his olive skin look pale under the neon. He looked smaller now, the flashy underling who had thought he could outsmart the old lion. Vincenzo stopped just a few feet away, his cold amber-brown eyes locked onto Angelo's face. "You took my keys. You let them empty my vault. And now you beg like a dog in the rain." Luca watched in silence, his hopeful eyes now hard with anger. The mother's cross on his neck moved as he breathed.
For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the ground. Vincenzo could have ended it right there. His hands were strong enough, and the rage still burned inside him. But he chose something colder. He took the cigarette from his mouth and flicked it into a puddle, where it hissed and died. "You're not worth the bullet tonight, pretty boy. Run back to your new friends. Tell them the architect is coming. Tell them every move they make, I will know." Angelo's face twisted again, relief mixed with terror. He backed away quickly, almost slipping on the wet ground, then turned and hurried out of the alley. Vincenzo stood still as the rain washed over him. He looked at Luca and spoke quietly. "Fear is a better weapon than death sometimes. Let him sweat. Let him wonder when the hammer will fall. The real pain starts now."
As father and son walked out of the alley together, the psychological game had begun. Angelo would carry the weight of that fear into every dark corner of the city, and Vincenzo's revenge moved one careful step closer. The rain had slowed to a light mist when Vincenzo stepped through the back door of Giovanni's private club. Neon lights from the main room cast a blue and red glow over everything. Stacks of cash and rolled-up city blueprints covered the tables, the very papers and money stolen from the vault. The air smelled of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Giovanni the collector Lombardi sat in the center of it all like a king on a cheap throne. He was a short, stocky man of 48, with a soft belly that pushed hard against the buttons of his navy three-piece suit. His pale skin looked almost white under the lights, never touched by real street work. Receding salt and pepper hair was slicked back with too much grease. Heavy gold-rimmed glasses sat on his bulbous nose, and a small, perfectly trimmed goatee framed his mouth in an oily smile. His small, sharp eyes glittered with greed behind the lenses as he counted another pile of money with manicured hands. Heavy gold rings shone on nearly every finger.
He looked up when the door opened. His smile froze. Vincenzo walked in alone, rain still dripping from his black suit. A fresh cigarette burned between his lips, smoke curling past the jagged scar on his cheek. His broad shoulders and cold amber-brown eyes filled the room with quiet danger. He stopped a few feet from the table and stared at the stolen goods spread out before him. "Nice collection you have here, Giovanni," Vincenzo said in a low, steady voice. "Too bad none of it belongs to you." Giovanni leaned back in his chair, trying to look calm. "Don Vincenzo, always a surprise. Business is business. You got old and slow. The city needs fresh hands." Vincenzo took a slow drag from his cigarette. "You sent your dogs into my house. You let that pretty boy open the door. And now you sit here smiling while you count my money." The two men locked eyes. It was a game of words, each sentence sharp like a hidden blade. Giovanni tried to twist the truth, offering shares and excuses. Vincenzo answered with calm truth, reminding him who had built every brick of the city they were fighting over. The air grew thick with tension.
Suddenly, Giovanni reached under the table for a gun. Before he could raise it, Vincenzo moved fast for a man his size. He grabbed Giovanni by the collar and slammed his round face down onto the table. Glasses flew off. Blood burst from the rival's nose and stained the stolen blueprints. At that moment, the back door burst open. Marco the Hammer Rossi stepped in, his huge frame blocking the exit. His shaved head shone under the neon, prison tattoos visible on his thick arms, and the St. Michael medallion rested heavy on his chest. He cracked his knuckles once, ready to finish the job. Giovanni gasped for air, his oily smile gone and his greedy eyes wide with fear. "Stop! Take the contracts! They're yours!" Vincenzo pressed harder, his voice ice cold. "All of it. Every paper, every dollar. You will return what you stole, or the hammer will break every bone in your soft body."
Marco moved forward and began gathering the contracts and cash into bags. Giovanni whimpered but nodded quickly, his manicured hands shaking. As they left the club, the first part of the stolen empire was already returning to its rightful owner. Vincenzo flicked his cigarette into the wet street and looked back at the beaten man on the floor. The collector had learned tonight that some men were never meant to own what the architect had built. The rain poured down harder than ever as the final night of revenge arrived. Marco and Luca dragged the three betrayers up to the same rooftop where Vincenzo had stood at the very beginning. Water hammered the concrete and ran in rivers across the surface. Neon lights from the city skyline flickered through the downpour, lighting up the scene like a stage built for judgment.
Angelo Pretty Boy Caruso and Giovanni the Collector Lombardi were thrown to their knees in the center of the roof. Angelo's perfect pompadour was now ruined, his charcoal suit soaked and torn. His handsome face twisted in pure terror, the charming smile long gone. Giovanni knelt beside him, his round body shaking, gold-rimmed glasses cracked, and his oily goatee dripping with rain and blood. His soft belly heaved as he gasped for air. The third man, one of Giovanni's main helpers, trembled between them. Vincenzo, the architect, Potenza, stood tall before them. Rain streamed down his scarred face, making the jagged line on his cheek glisten red under the city lights. His steel-gray hair was plastered to his head, and his black suit clung to his broad shoulders. The half-burned cigarette still hung from his lips, smoke fighting against the heavy rain. His cold, amber-brown eyes burned with the quiet fury of a man who had built this entire skyline and watched it nearly slip away. He looked down at the kneeling men. "You dared to steal from me," he said, his voice low and rough, cutting through the sound of the rain. "You thought the architect was finished. You laughed while you emptied my vault and sold my city."
Angelo begged first, his voice breaking. "Please, boss, I made a mistake. I can fix it. Don't do this." Giovanni whimpered beside him, his greedy eyes wide with fear. "It was just business. Take the money back. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Vincenzo took a slow step closer. Luca stood a few feet away, watching everything with wide eyes. The young man's leather jacket was soaked, and his mother's cross shone against his chest. He saw his father's face clearly now, the scar, the rain, the unblinking stare, and understood the weight of the moment. The architect pulled the cigarette from his mouth and flicked it over the edge of the roof. "A quick bullet would be too easy for you," he said. "The whole city needs to remember what happens when you steal from the man who built it." He gave a short nod to Marco. The hammer stepped forward, his huge fists ready. What followed was brutal and final.
Marco's powerful blows landed with sickening force. Bones cracked. Blood mixed with the rain and washed across the rooftop. Angelo's pretty face was no longer handsome. Giovanni's soft body offered no protection against the punishment. The third man fell quickly. One by one, their bodies dropped to the wet concrete, lifeless under the pouring sky. Vincenzo stood completely still through it all, rain running down his face. He did not look away. When it was over, he turned and looked out over the glowing city he had raised from nothing. The skyline stretched before him like a kingdom returned. Luca stepped up beside his father. The hope in the young man's eyes had hardened, but respect burned there too. Vincenzo placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "This is how we keep what we build," he said quietly, "with strength and with memory." The architect remained standing tall as the rain continued to fall, washing the blood from the rooftop and carrying it down into the streets below. The bodies lay still, but Vincenzo Potenza rose once more, colder, stronger, and more dangerous than before. The savage revenge was complete. Dawn broke slowly over the city, pushing pale light through the heavy clouds. The rain had finally eased into a soft drizzle that washed the rooftops clean. Vincenzo the architect Potenza stood at the edge of the same rooftop where the night had ended in blood. Fresh red stains marked his black suit, but a new cigarette burned steady between his lips. Smoke curled upward as he looked out across the skyline he had built with his own hands. Marco the Hammer Rossi stood to his right, silent and solid as ever. His shaved head and thick arms showed the marks of the long night, yet the St. Michael medallion still rested calm on his chest. Luca Potenza stood on his father's left, the young man's leather jacket soaked and his mother's cross shining against his shirt. The hopeful spark in his eyes had changed into something sharper and stronger. The empire was theirs once more. The stolen contracts had been returned. The money was back in the family vault. The streets below already whispered the news. No one would dare touch what belonged to Vincenzo Potenza again. Vincenzo took a long drag from his cigarette. His steel-gray hair was wet and pushed back from his scarred face. The jagged line on his cheek had stopped bleeding, but it stood out clear in the morning light. His amber-brown eyes, once touched by doubt, now looked harder and colder. The betrayal had changed him. The architect who once trusted too easily was gone. In his place stood a man who would rule with iron and memory. He spoke quietly, his rough voice carrying over the waking city. "They dared to steal from the man who built this city, and the city will never forget." Marco gave a single nod, his dark eyes steady. Luca stood taller beside his father, ready to learn the harder lessons of power. Vincenzo flicked the cigarette over the edge and watched it fall toward the streets below. The rain-washed pavement far down still carried faint red streaks that ran like rivers into the gutters. The blood of the night was washing away, but the warning would remain. As the sun climbed higher, new shadows seemed to move in the distance. Other hungry men were always watching, always waiting for a chance to test the king of the skyline. Vincenzo felt it in his bones. The fight was never truly over. He turned away from the edge and placed one hand on Luca's shoulder and the other on Marco's arm. "We keep building," he said, "brick by brick, blood by blood." The three men stood together as the city woke up beneath them. The towers Vincenzo had raised gleamed in the early light, strong and unforgiving. The architect still ruled.
If you watched to the end, please hit that subscribe button right now for more. Like this video and comment below.